Counterattack, the Battle of Arras, 1940. This is a folio game by Revolution Games, so I haven't played a game by them in a while, so I was pretty excited because the games that I played by them, some more, some less, I all enjoyed. The theme is pretty interesting because we're in 1940, so the French campaign, German attack against France, and we're used, of course, to see in that scenario, the Germans just piling through French and Allied units. Here we have a specific episode that in which, well, the Allies managed to counterattack. So you're gonna have the Allies bruising the German forces and forcing them to a temporary halt before they start piling through them again. Still, already enough variety, already a new take or a different take from a topic that we're seeing very often in wargaming. As for the game system, this is an area impulse game, so it is the same system that you may have seen in games such as Not War But Murder, and most famously in the the so-called Storm over family, from Storm over Arnhem, Storm over Stalingrad, and Storm over a lot of other places. So it's a system that has a lot of flexibility because instead of I go activate all of my units, you activate all of your units, you choose an area and you can do things within that area. You don't even have to activate all of your units, so you have a lot of flexibility there. The game is for 2 players, but can also be played solitaire by a player controlling both sides at the best of their possibilities. Let's see how the game works. This is the map of the game, which is printed on paper, but it lays flat on the table quite easily. I didn't have to cover it with a piece of plexiglass. The map is divided in these areas, and the borders are indicated by these lines here, and also by rivers and canals. And each area has an identifier in the middle, which is split in 2 halves. The top half simply identifies the number of the area for setup purposes, and then the bottom tells you the defensive advantage that that area gives to anybody who is defending in there. Also, as you can see, they're divided in gray, blue, and half gray, half blue. At the beginning of the game, the Allied player will start in the blue areas, the German player in the German areas, and then in the gray areas, and then, well, things will happen. The general idea is that the city of Arras will be the center of the attention, as you maybe can tell also from the fact that it is in the center of the map. The Allied player will try basically to drive a wedge across the map to open away from that zone there to one of these 2 zones here. If the Allied player manages to have a unit here or here that has a line of communication to that zone there, then the Allied player wins an early victory. The German player wins an early victory if the German player manages to control the city and to prevent the Allied player from having control of at least 2 areas south of this river here. If neither of those 2 conditions are met before the end of turn 7, then the game ends and the victory is determined on victory points that are based on elimination of enemy units and control of key locations on the map. Now, to have a closer look at the game and at the units. Units are represented by these counters here that look neat and they are thick enough. I heard or I saw on Board Game Geek a lot of complaints about the counters of the first edition. Doesn't look like you had to worry about these counters being too thin. We have infantry, we have armor, artillery, armor just fell. Artillery, then we have anti-tank and leaders. These units have 3 main values. Here in the bottom left you have the attack value, followed by the defensive value, and followed by the movement value. When you attack an enemy, you will designate one of your units as the lead unit, the one that really does most of the action, takes the glory but also takes the brunt of the hit. And then other units may support the lead unit. Anti-tank and leaders cannot be lead units in attacks, and that is indicated by the fact that they don't have an attack factor. Their actual factor only matters in combat when they are defending. In attack, they're just regular supporting units. So these units will be on the map. It's very important for the ally player to retain control of the city here for the reasons that we said, that is to prevent the German player from achieving early victory, but also because of the central location. A lot of action will happen around the city, and so the ally player will have interest in pouring units in there and using that sort of as a headquarters, a deployment center, and then from there to send them out, because the city, on top of everything, also has excellent defensive value. Oh, speaking about the map and where the units are, very important. During setup, there is also a number of French units that are placed there and that are locked there at the beginning of the game. They cannot be used. They need to be activated later. And a number of German units here that are equally locked. Starting from turn 2, there is a procedure to determine exactly when the French units will join the fight on the ally side and when the German units also will be allowed to act. But what is important is that as the ally player is coming down here and trying to drive and open a path through the map, the ally player also knows that, hooray, there will be a boon coming from those French units, which are pretty good actually, mainly armor, will be helpful to have them on this flank here. However, the ally player cannot just send those units willy-nilly everywhere they want, because there will be then another number of German units that may come from here. So it could be good to keep some in this area to protect against that arrival, and then to support other areas around here. And let's put some German units on the map too, a little bit randomly, but just so that we still get a sense of how things work. Now, there is a maximum of 6 units per area on the board. Now, the game is divided in turns, and each turn has a number of impulses, as you see here from the impulse track. There's a procedure at the beginning of the turn to determine who is the active player, who is the player that will take the first impulse, and also who has advantage. The player that has advantage is indicated by the side on which this marker, the turn marker, is played. Advantage means that you can spend that advantage when the marker is facing up and showing your side, and once you use that advantage, for example, one of them would be to reroll dice. You can also reset the impulse. We'll see how impulses work. The idea is when you get that advantage, when you use it, you spend it and you flip it to the other side. Also at the beginning of the turn, that advantage side is based on whoever will go to whoever is taking the first impulse for the turn. Impulse. Impulses are basically the player's turns when you do stuff. During an impulse, you can choose to, well, pass. That's self-explanatory. You can choose to activate an area and to use the units in that area to move and or fight, or you can choose a bombardment impulse, in which case you don't move units, but you use artillery units to target an area on the board. Whichever is your choice, after you are done, then you move to the next impulse, but before you can actually perform it, you roll a die. So the first impulse, you always have it for certain. When you get here, you roll a die. If you roll a 1, as you can see indicated there, actually you lost momentum and this is reset, but on the other side, and now the other player is the impulse player. Suppose that you rolled anything but a 1. If you want, you can take another impulse. In this case, however, you move it here and you roll a die, a 6-sided die, and if you roll a 1 or a 2, well, then actually you don't take your impulse. Basically, you can take multiple impulses in a turn if you're lucky, if you keep rolling well. Even when you're the 6th impulse, so then there's still a chance if you roll a 6, that you can still take impulses. So that's pretty neat because it definitely adds uncertainty to the flow of the battle, and that's very good if you're playing the game in solitaire, controlling both sides at the best of your possibilities. Now, for a bombardment turn, you will simply declare the area that you're attacking, and then you will use your units, your artillery units. You will designate an artillery unit as the lead unit, and you use its full attack value. Then you give a +2 to your attack for each supporting artillery, +1 if the area that you're attacking contains more than 4 units, and then you roll 2 dice and you add those modifiers to that. The defender also rolls 2 dice, adds the defensive value of the terrain, adds +1 for each artillery in the area that is being attacked. And if the result of the attacker is higher than that of the defender, then the defender takes a number of attrition points equal to the difference. We'll see what attrition points are after I tell you about the other way of inflicting attrition points, which is, actual main combat. But that would be the bombardment impulse. After you use a unit in an impulse, the unit is flipped to its spent side, and so it only has a defensive value. Now it cannot really do anything else. As for the main impulse, in case you decide not to do a bombardment, well, then you activate an area, and then you can activate any and all, but don't have to activate all of the units in that area. Suppose that I am the player and I decide to activate that area for my impulse. Now the units that are in there, I can activate them to do stuff, and I decide that I want to leave this unit behind, maybe even this unit behind, and I want to move these units here and be happy with that. So you will move spending movement points, but the number of movement points that you spend is not based on the characteristics of the terrain, but the presence of enemy units. Basically, moving in an area that doesn't have enemy units next to it is very cheap. It's more expensive to move next to an area that only has spent enemy units, more expensive still in an area that has fresh enemy units. So you can move, and yes, if you have enough movement points, you can also enter an area that has enemy units. And suppose that here we enter, but we mollified the enemy a little bit with a previous bombardment, so we're entering, and this is the situation. When you enter an area during your impulse that did not have your units in it before, then there will be a mandatory round of combat. You can also simply declare a round of combat if you start an impulse in an area that is already contested, has units of both players. Then you say, I'm going to activate these units and I'm going to activate them for combat immediately. And so that's the interesting thing. Now, as for combat, it's pretty much similar to the bombardment, meaning that each player will roll 2 dice and will add a number of modifiers. For example, the attacker will choose a unit to be the lead unit, remember that idea, and will use the full attack value of that unit. It would be 5 in that case. Then +1 for each supporting unit. In this case, these units will simply land a point of support regardless of the actual attack value. Then there will be other things, for example, combined arms, if you have 3 different types of units that are working together. Again, those modifiers plus 2 6-sided dice not included with the game. The opponent, the defender, will also select a lead unit, say this one here, for example. We'll add +1 for each fresh supporting defensive unit. Leader units can actually lend that support even if they are spent. Otherwise, it's +1 for each fresh supporting unit. So, lead unit, +1 for each fresh supporting unit, unless it is a leader, then even if it's spent, still +1, plus the modifier that we have here. And again, to roll 2-sided dice, so both players at the end will have 2d6s rolled plus their modifiers. If the attacker has a higher total than the defender, the attacker inflicts attrition points on the loser, again, equal to the number of the difference between the attack value and the defense value. And at the end of all this, in any case, all the units of the attacker will be spent after the attack has been performed. If the two results are equal, then the units are still spent and there is no effect on the defender. If the defender has a higher value, then the lead unit of the attacker is eliminated, and if this was a round of combat that started because the attacker just entered, then the attacker is repulsed and immediately needs to leave. So back to the concept of attrition points, that is what you have in bombardment and normal combat when the attacker has a higher value than the defender. Those attrition points that are generated must be paid for by the defender. It can be paid for in different ways. There's a very flexible way of doing things here. For example, the defender may pay for 3 attrition points by eliminating a fresh unit, however, ouch. Or a single attrition point by spending a fresh unit and turning it to its spent side. Or a spent unit that is eliminated also removes an attrition point, a spent, 2 attrition points, and a spent unit that retreats then is worth or allows the defender to pay for 2 attrition points. If all units of the opponent are eliminated and the attacker still has attrition points, so by eliminating or retreating everybody, the defender still hasn't paid for all of their attrition points, then actually the units of the attacker are not spent. That was an overrun, and then those units can be activated and they can act again. Pretty much this is the idea. Players alternate back and forth using impulses to bombard each other, to move and attack. Once both players have spent all the units, all units are spent, and or both players have passed, then the turn is over and you start the next turn. At the end of the turn, there's also a phase in which players can bring back to the battlefield some of their eliminated units. But still, this is the general idea. Continue like this until either a player achieves an early victory by fulfilling their operational goals, or until the end of turn 7, in which case then the winner is determined based on victory points. So this is a simple game, it's a small game. Most games in the Storm Over, or in any case in the Area Impulse family, tend to be like that. I don't know if it's mandatory, but they tend to be friendly to beginners, players, games that you can play in an evening or less. So here you can probably play 2 games in a single evening. So there is that. They're very accessible games, and Counterattack 1940 is no exception. So you have a game that is easy to learn. The rulebook has a couple of areas that left some minor details to the imagination. I had to make some judgment calls here and there about the time of certain things, but nothing too bad. So it's still not hard to learn because the general concept is so simple. And as I said in introduction and in the video, I love the flexibility of the Area Impulse system. There's a lot that you can do. You're not forced to a simple script. You can really manipulate the timing as you activate units in an area, and then you leave another area untouched for now. But then things happen you don't expect. For example, the opponent's actions will force some of your units in that area that you were saving to become spent, so you don't really get to activate them. So there are really interesting elements here when it comes to the manipulation of the turn order. As for how this game implements those ideas specifically, well, there's something interesting here in the balance of the forces. This is a game system that favors the defender, if nothing else, because the defender is always going to get spent, the attacker is always going to get spent, and so that's good for the defender. The attacker may get eliminated, or some units eliminated, and so on and so forth. That means that intrinsically in this game system, the attacker wants to have really good odds. You want to mount a large attack against a smaller group. This is something you find in all of wargaming, of course, but there are certain systems that are more unforgiving about that. In other cases, you launch an attack, a kind of like 50% chance, well, then maybe that unit is reduced or eliminated. Here you launch an attack which is sort of undecisive, a large number of units become spent, that has a considerable cost. So even more than in other wargame systems, you really want to attack at good odds, which is not easy. The forces in the game are pretty well balanced, and also the area, the board is not too big, so you can't really maneuver a lot in a way that then you can mount that ginormous attack. Stacking limits also prevent you from doing so. So you have a situation in which both players constantly feel forced to act a little bit in a rushed way, because, well, you may wait the entire game to mount the mighty attack, which may never happen, is not really entirely possible, or launch some of these half-prepared, half-baked attacks and hope things don't go too bad. The situation on the map, the game system, the number of turns force you to act even if you're not fully ready. I guess that really captures the idea of a counterattack that, on one hand, well, the Germans did not expect that. On the other hand, the Allies in general, they are taken aback, they're behind the curves in terms of like, what the heck is this invasion? It doesn't follow the rules that we knew. So the confusion, the surprise for both sides seems to be captured here by the fact that you constantly have to deal with actions that are suboptimal, but that's what you have to do. And that is fun. The map, the configuration of the map with the city, with the city in the middle that acts as a center of propagation of action for the Allies, that's an advantage. On the other hand, that is such a valuable target if the German player takes it, that there's going to be a lot of attention there. So it's an interesting map because you have a large division due to the river with things that can happen only on one side or that happen differently. But then from there, it's not just a single line. It's really the organic movements all around the town, and sometimes the Germans try to go to surround the opponents, and of course the ally will try to do so, though mainly they're just trying to drive through the map. So they're just interesting dynamic movements of troops, interesting dynamic interactions. The game is definitely flavorful in terms of theme. There are enough unique rules and specific rules that really give you the historical Chrome. There are even more rules than I explained. I don't often talk about all the optional rules in my videos because I don't want the main segment to be too long, but there are some of those that can add more detail and more Chrome at the cost of more complexity, but then it's up to you to decide what you want to take and what you don't need. So in general, what you have here is definitely a game that could be played at the introductory level. Somebody who's new to wargaming, maybe daunted by some of the more complex designs. This game specifically, and actually most games in the Area Impulse family, in the Storm Over family, are friendly to the beginner wargamer. So there's that, which is a great advantage. It's also a game that, of course, the most seasoned hardcore grognard may decide to play when they don't necessarily want to go hardcore because they're tired, or sometimes you just need a change of pace. And then what you have here is a game that is simple to play, flows well, like most games in the system, flows well, plays well, has a lot of interesting decisions for both sides, has historical Chrome, but again, it's in a very manageable package. So in general, I definitely enjoyed the Counterattack, the Battle of Arras 1940. I recommend it both to beginner wargamers and to seasoned wargamers because it's a simple game, but it's a fun one, even if you know and can play more complicated games.